Hi everybody and welcome to LiveCode Q&A 5. We had a nice busy session last week, so I hope you all have some great questions for me again today. Just have a look and see who's here so far. Hi Kelly, it's the first person to say hi, Kelly from Canada. So like I say, if you've got any questions that you want us to look at, just pop them in the chat and I'll be looking back and forth to see what is that people would like to discuss. As I said, we had a nice busy session last week. Lots of questions, lots of content, lots of things to look at. So hopefully we can do the same today. You should all have had the slides that cover the things we talked about last week sent out to you. When you get the slides, if there is anything that I have missed or that you want clarification on, then you can always ask in the next session and we can have a look at them. If it's just something that I missed from the slides that we did discuss, I can update the slides. If it's something that you want to look into a bit deeper or you want some clarification on something that's not clear, then of course just pop a question in the chat. Hi Lonnie, hi from Hawaii. I hope everybody's getting some nice weather where they are. Right, so we'll just give it a few minutes, see who else might join us. And yes, if you have got any questions, do just pop them in the chat. What I thought we might look at this week a little bit is generally how to store data that goes along with your app. We had a question actually from Lonnie about connecting with an SQL to an SQL database. I don't know if you managed to get that sorted, Lonnie, but regardless, it's quite a useful topic for us to talk about. So if we don't have lots of questions, we can have a look at that. The reason that we want to do that is because once you've built your app into a standalone, you can't actually make any changes to it. So you can't store any data in the actual app file, in the standalone file itself, because especially with iOS and signed apps, then if you sign an app, then you absolutely can't make any changes to it. There's a few ways that you can do things on the desktop where you basically use a launcher app, which launches a stack, which you then can make changes to, but it's really useful to be able to store data outside of your app so that it's there the next time your user logs in. One way to do that is databases. We briefly touched on JSON files, etc. last week. That's another good way to do it, is if you've got an array of data, say preferences for your app, then you can store that as a JSON file, read it in again, set everything up so we can have a look at those. Okay, so Devin's asked, it's not receiving any slides and that multiple emails have gone unanswered. Now, I believe that the slides are added to the YouTube videos. I'll need to double check that. I'm surprised that your emails have gone unanswered. Are you emailing support@livecode.com? That's the best email to contact us via, just support@livecode.com. And you should get an automatic response, and then you should get a real response from one of us, from one of the team, within 2 days. That's our goal. That's what we try and keep to. So if you're not receiving emails from us occasionally, our emails from LiveCode get caught in spam filters. Sometimes it's something that you can find in your junk folder, and sometimes they never reach you. So if it was to support@livecode.com, I'll have a look and see if I can find your emails and see if they've been responded to. And what we have is we have a sort of, well, it's a Gmail account that we can send emails onto people if our LiveCode emails are getting blocked. So I will look at that and I will double check how the slides are sent. Like I say, I believe they're linked to in the YouTube videos when we upload them, but I would have thought you would have got an email letting you know when they're available. So I will double check that. Okay, so Kelly's asking about a couple of lessons in the alarm interface. So when you say the lesson seems to be missing a section, is that the video or the slides? That's something I'll probably look at. I'll take a look at after this session. It could be that something is missing, Kelly. So I'll take a look at those once we're done with our Q&A. Because I'll need to have a dig into that and see if there is something missing. Oh, and then Lonnie's asked, if you set your stack and card to be able to resize, how do you get your objects like in the Notes app? The text of the note doesn't expand. Okay, so yes, so that's something we can certainly look at. That's quite a nice thing to be able to do. It's not so relevant on mobile apps because obviously they don't resize. Those are just the size that they are. But with desktop apps, there's a couple of ways that you can do it. So we will have a look at those, and then we'll touch on the databases. Okay, so let's get started with looking at some examples. Just share my screen. Okay, so I've got LiveCode already started up here. So let's have a look at resizing your controls when your stack is resized first. So if we create a new stack, in general, you can resize it. There is a property in the Stack Inspector, just so that everybody's aware, where you can turn resizable on or off, because you might want to write an app, even if it is for the desktop, that you actually don't want the user to be able to resize. So if you turn off resizable, then they can't grab the corner and resize it. But if that is on, which by default it is for all new stacks, then there's your stack. So let's put some controls on here so that we have something to work with. So let's do a field here and a button. So in general, when you resize the stack resizes, but nothing happens to your controls. Now there's a couple of ways you can handle this. So let's look at the property inspector for the field here. So if you go to the last tab, which is the geometry tab, so this is called the geometry manager. So this allows you to set this up to automatically resize and reposition things when you resize your stack. So this is currently on scale selected object. And what we will want to do for our selected object, which is currently the field, is we'll want to scale it relative to the right-hand side and the bottom of the stack. So if I turn those on, let me move that out of the way, you can now see that when I resize the stack, the field also resizes, and it's relative to the right and the bottom, because we want the sort of top left of our field to remain in the same position. These options that'll depend on how you want things to move around. So you'll see here I chose this one, which means it's with the sort of edge of the stack. You can also do it relative to other objects. So if you want things to scale relative to other objects, then you can do that. And this option, change that. I don't think that actually changes here, but this is basically an absolute scaling, and this I think is sort of relative scaling. So for the field, that works fine. For the button, we could do the same thing. We could do it relative to the bottom right, but then that resizes our buttons. That isn't quite what we want here. So instead, we turn those off again. Just click twice to turn them off. So go back to how we were before. What we actually want to do is we don't want the button to change size, but we want it to change position. So instead of having the button set to scale the selected object, we'll position the selected object. And again, we'll do it relative to the right-hand side and the bottom of the stack. And then it should stay in the right place relative to the bottom and right of the stack. So that's a very, very simple example. The easiest way to get to grips with the geometry manager is just to have a play around with it, see what happens when you do it this way. Quite often it doesn't change. It's more, it depends on what other objects you have selected. Instead of doing it relative to the size of the stack, you can do it relative to other controls, etc. So this is a good place to start and to have a play around, and then it does a lot of the work for you. Now I'm just going to turn these off so that it doesn't work anymore. And there's the field. So when it's all grey like this, it just means that there's no sort of geometry set on the controls. So now nothing will happen when I resize the stack. Now, if you want to do it in code, what we'll do is we will handle this on the card script. And that's because you'll probably want slightly different code for each of your cards. So we want it to be relative to the card that we're currently on. And what happens is when the stack is resized, we get a resize stack message. I'll just show you that in the dictionary. So it's resize stack. And so you'll see here it's a message. It's sent to the current card, so to whichever card we're currently on, when the stack window is resized, and you get the new width, the new height, the old width, and the old height, in case you want to do anything with those. So is it in here? Do we have resize stack message? There we go. P new width, P new height, P old width, P old height. So what we want to do is for our field, we'll write some code to resize it. So let's give our field a name. I'll just call this text, and I'll call our button the go, for example. What we might want to do is we might want to set the width of field text to P new width. And let's do -40. So we'll leave a 20 pixel gap on either side, sorry. And we'll also change the height. So we'll set the height. Field text to P new height. And this one will take a bit more off because we want to leave space for the button. So let's make that 60, say. Apply that, and now when we resize our stack, the field should change size. We haven't done anything with the button yet. Okay, so you can see that it's changed size, but the position is wrong. It's not exactly where we want it to be. So after we've resized something, then we want to set the position of it. And in this case, what we'll do is we'll just set the top left. So that's the point up here of field text. And we'll go for 2020. Now that's relative to the top left of the card here. So up here is 00, so 2020 will be here. So now when we resize, our field will resize, and oh, I meant to take off 40 there. So we get 20 on either side. Now it's resizing and repositioning. Now we want to be careful about the order that we do these in, because setting the width and the height, or the rect, or anything else that changes the size of a control, will change its position. So you want to be sure that you do them in the right order. So you can see here, if I set the top left first and then change the width and height, it jumps around. So you always want to change the size and then the position, because changing the size will affect the position. And similarly for our button, if we want to do it in code, in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the top right, the bottom right of the button relative to the bottom right of the stack. So we want to set the lock, oh no, sorry, the bottom right, I did say the bottom right. Button go. And we want it to be, it'll be P new width -20, P new height -20, and that should position it in the bottom right with a 20 pixel gap on either side. And because I didn't take quite enough off here, there's not enough space for it, so we change that to -80 to make the field a bit smaller. And there it's now exactly where we want it to be. So in general, I think it's a good idea to start with the geometry manager, see if that does everything you want, because you can imagine this has just got two controls and we've already written this much code for it. If you have a very complicated UI, then writing the code for all of it, that's going to be a lot of code, but it also does give you very particular controls. So for example, if you want to do sort of something more responsive when they change the size, So depending on the layout of your stack, imagine if you had, for example, 2 fields next to each other. This is fine as long as it's laid out like this, but if somebody resizes the stack small enough that they get really small, then you might want to put them on top of each other and put them in a scrolling group or something. You can't do that with the geometry manager, it's not clever enough for that. So if you want a slightly more sort of responsive design, then you can do it in the code. So these are the 2 ways that you can resize and reposition your controls when the stack is resized. Okay, so let's have a look at the questions. So Kelly's commented relevant on mobile when you go from tablet to phone and back. So yes, it would be if you're moving, but what I really meant was once it's on the phone or on the tablet, it won't change size. So if you're only doing mobile development, you can either use the full screen modes, which we've talked about before, which will automatically scale everything for you. Or what you could do is, as part of your build process, perhaps, you could write code that would do all this and you would put everything in the right place before you deploy it. Or you could actually do that in a startup or a pre-OpenStack handler. So if, for example, if the full screen mode doesn't give you sort of granular enough control, if it doesn't do everything that you want it to do, if it's not smart enough, then what you could do is you could write code similar to this for all your controls on all your cards. You could run that on startup or in pre-OpenStack, and what it would do is it could position every control exactly where you want it based on the actual size of the device that your app has been deployed to. So again, you could do a bit more responsive design that way, and you could use every pixel of the available space. Whereas sometimes with the full screen modes, they will use up some of the screen real estate. For example, with Letterboxd, you'll always have it nicely scaled and the aspect ratio will be preserved, but you will have black bars perhaps at the top and the bottom or the right and left, which is taking up some of your screen real estate. If you want to avoid that, then you can write all your code, you can run it in pre-OpenStack or in startup, and then it will position everything perfectly relative to the size of the device that it is actually running on. So hopefully that was helpful. Okay, so we've got a question from Jürgen, or Jürgen, sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. How can I show a YouTube video in my app? As I tried it, the screen was black and I can only hear the voice. So the easiest way to show a YouTube video in your stack, let's create a new stack here, is to use a browser widget. So let's add a browser widget here, and you can just set the URL to a YouTube URL. Now, the problem with doing YouTube URLs is you won't just get the video, you'll get the actual YouTube page. So let me find the LiveCode page so that we can have a look. Use this as an example. I'm going to pick a video that's not me. Right, so here is here's Kevin's sort of biographical video. So if I set the URL of this browser widget to this YouTube page, then this should work. But you'll see that you do get the sort of the YouTube stuff. I'll just pause the video. So you do get the whole YouTube page. Now, there is a way around that where you can use the embed code. Instead, what you need to do in that case is you need to set the HTML text of the browser instead. So let's try this. So in our card script, I'm just going to put a button on here, and we'll do something in here. So let's say on mouse up, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to construct a little bit of HTML. I think this should work. I'm sure I've done this, but off the top of my head, I'm hoping that this will work. So HTML. Actually, from YouTube, I need to get the embed code. So we'll copy the embed code here. Let's paste that here and see what it is. Is that what I expected? No, that's better. Okay, so there's the embed code. So actually, just because it's a bit easier, I'm going to cheat a little and put this into a field. Because you need to watch out for this has things like quotes and stuff in it, so I can't just put it into a variable. So I'll put it into this field. I'll call the field HTML. HTML. And instead of setting the URL, what we can do is we can set the HTML text of widget browser to field HTML. Obviously, you probably wouldn't want to use a field, but just as an example. And we'll see what happens, because I'm not 100% sure this will in fact work. Ah, it did. Okay, so now in that case, you just get the video. Obviously, it doesn't really fit there, but you can play around with that so that it actually looks a bit better. Now, you mentioned, let me just go back to the chat so I can see. So when you say you tried it and the screen was black, that could depend on a number of things. It will depend what you were deploying it to, if you were perhaps trying to use a player. It'll really depend on how you were trying to play the video, but I would recommend for things like this, I would use a browser widget, because as you can see, it works quite nicely, and you can use the embed code instead of the actual sort of YouTube URL to get it without all the rest of the web page around it. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful. Okay, so I think that's all the questions we've got. Let me have a quick look. Okay, so there aren't any other questions in the chat just now, so perhaps it would be useful to talk a little bit about databases and how to store sort of data externally. So we'll start with a really simple example. We'll just use a text file. It may be that some of you have already covered this. If you've been working through the app building course or something else, you might have already done this, but I'll just do a very quick example of how it works. So again, we will create a new stack, and I'll give this a name so we can, because we'll save it as a standalone and see what's actually happening. So we'll call this preferences save test. Okay, and I'm just going to add a label field, which I'll put name into, and then a field called name. So we're just going to set this up so that when you start up your app, you can put your name in, and the next time it will remember your name. So as a very quick example, so I'll put a little instruction at the top here. So just please enter your name. What we'll do is we'll just save this to a text file, and then we'll do a JSON example, and then we'll have a look at a database. Okay, so now if I save this as a standalone, let's save this to the desktop, go to the standalone application settings. I'm just going to build for Mac just now, just because then we can run it and see what's happening. So if I save that as a standalone application, now, obviously, when you're working with your stack, any changes you make, if you then save the stack, they will still be there. So if I put my name in here, close this down, restart it, my name will still be there. That doesn't happen with standalones. Let me hide this. Right, here's my preferences save test. So if I put my name in here and then close it and then restart it, no name, because it's in exactly the same state as it was when you saved it. So this could be used for preferences, it could be high scores, it could be all sorts of things. Any kind of data that you want to persist between uses of your app needs to be saved out to a separate file. Let me come back to stack. So now let's open up the card script, I guess. So what we want to do is when we close the card, so on close card, so this is sent to each card when it's closed. That could be going to another card, or it could be closing the stack. So on close card, I'm going to put field name, so this is the contents of field name, into URL, file, colon, and then actually what I'll do is I'll construct the path to the file that I want. So I'm going to use special folder path resources, which on the desktop is just at the same location, same folder as where your stack is. And on mobile, it's next to the actual standalone application. So anything that you include with your standalone would be in the resources folder. So put special folder path resources and slash name.txt into t file. So that's the path that we're going to save to. Then we'll put field name into URL, file, colon, and t file. And we need to tell it that it's a file. That's the URL type as opposed to, HTTP or HTTPS or whatever. It's a file. And by putting the contents into URL file, then LiveCode it'll actually create that file and it will put something in it. So let's save that. And we'll build a standalone so that we can see what's happening. Okay, again, I'll just hide this so we can see what's happening. Start up this references save test, and I'll put this in here, Elanor. And when I close it, it will get the close card message, and it will create a file. It should have created a file. Oh, yes, it's created it here, name.txt. So there is the file. Actually, sorry, that's not quite right. Let me get rid of this, because that did not go where I expected it to. So we'll have a look at this. And actually what I'll do is I'll use the documents folder. That's probably a better place anyway, because documents works on desktop and on the mobile platform. So we won't need to make any changes or check what platform we're on. So let's try this again. Save this. Let me check that I did name that name. I did. Excellent. So again, I will save as a standalone application. This is because I had already done this once. Should hopefully work okay though. Okay, again, let's hide this. Start up the standalone. Put my name in. Close this. And now it's asking if it's allowed to access my documents folder. So I will say okay. That's because I'm on Catalina and it's very particular about allowing you to do things. Now, if I have a look at my documents folder, if I order this by date modified so that we can find it, there's my name file with Elanor in it. So that's now saved outside of the actual stack itself. Now, of course, what we want to be able to do is we actually want to be able to load that in when we start up. So again, in our card script, so we've done on close card. What we'll do is on pre-open card, We'll do just the inverse. We still want the path to the file, but instead of putting the field into the URL, we'll put the URL, so in this case it'll be the contents of that URL, and it'll go into field name. So in this case, we're getting the contents of the URL and we're putting it into our name field. So again, we'll save this as a standalone application. Okay, hide this. Right, now that should be in my documents folder. Let's double check that that's there. Yep, there's my name file. Now if I restart this, hopefully it has opened up that file, read the contents and put it into the field. So as far as your user knows, they don't know about all that work that you have to do, but you have to save it out and read it back in when you need it. And like I say, this is for any data that, that your app stores. Okay, so Lonnie's asked how we would do it without the call special folder path. So the special folder path call, that just lets you, the important thing is that you are building the path to the file. So if I use the message box to send a pre-open card here, and then we can stop, and we can see here that we now have the path. Now you can construct that path any way you want. If you don't want to use special folder path, then you can do it manually. So for example, I could put /users Elanor desktop /name.txt entity file. So if you want to do it that way, that's fine. You need to be careful because on another machine that path wouldn't work. On a machine where the user is not called Elanor, that path is not going to exist. There isn't a folder called /user/Elanor. So that would fail because the folder doesn't exist. So the nice thing about special folder path is when you send your app out, when you deploy it, when you put it in the App Store, this will give you the path to the documents folder on the machine that the app is currently running on, or to the desktop folder, or to the preferences folder. This will work on your machine, but it might not work on anybody else's. So you just have to be careful with paths that you're always using something that's going to be accessible wherever your app is running. If you're writing an app that's just a tool for you that helps you do a job more efficiently, or when you're testing, then you can absolutely do it this way. Absolutely. You just need the path to the file. Just want to be careful if you are moving your app to another machine, that it will also work there. Yeah, and like Kelly says, with the OS restrictions, special folder path is the only real safe way to write to disk, and there's only certain folders that you can actually write to on different machines. So on mobile, special folder path documents is always a writable location because it's the documents folder for that particular app and no other apps have access to it. Equally, you can write to the temp folder, but that's pretty much it on mobile devices. And as you saw, even on my machine, I had to give it permission to write to the documents folder. So it is quite well documented. We've got lists for all the different systems. So there's different ones for the desktop platforms, and then on iOS, you can only create files in the documents, cache, and temporary folders. So you just want to be careful that you're writing to somewhere that you're allowed to write to, and you're making sure that it is a writable location. Now, of course, if you want to write to a folder inside the documents path, then that's fine. You just have to make sure that that folder is created before you try and write to it. So for example, if I wanted to write to special folder path /documents/prefs and then name, I need to make sure that this prefs folder exists. And I think I don't think it was last week, it might have been the session before. In order to make sure that that folder exists, I can do create folder, special folder path, prefs. That because it's in the wrong place. And of course, I only want to create it if it doesn't already exist. So I'd first check the existence of the folder. So if there is, or in fact, check for the non-existence. If there's not a folder, the folder path /document/prefs, then I would create it. So we can see the whole line. And then I would be able to write to that folder. But you just need to make sure that the folder exists if you're using folders. And then I would put, oh, sorry, I put this in the wrong place really. This would be in the where you're trying to save it. So that would be there. And then I would put special folder path. Remember the slash. Then I would make sure that it existed. Then I would write to that URL. And then similarly, when I'm reading, I would put that into tfile. And then I would put URL tfile into field name. So you would just create the folder first. You just need to make sure you create the folder. And of course, you might have a succession of folders. You might have folders inside folders inside folders. You just have to make sure that all the folders exist, creating the top level one first, and then all the ones inside. And there's different ways you can do it. You can set the item delimiter to slash and then loop through the items of the file path, make sure they all exist. I can do a slide about that if I write myself a note, just to remind me to include it. Because if you try to write something into a folder that doesn't exist, it just won't work. Okay, so I will remember to put that into a slide. Okay, so hopefully that is useful. Now, what we can do is, if we don't want to use just a text file, if we want a bit more structure, we could do a JSON file instead. Now, we briefly looked at JSON last week, but let's do an example of a real use for it. So this would all be the same. We would still have our documents. I've changed that in both places, create the folder. But then instead of just putting our field name into our URL, what we might want to do is we might want to build up an array of all our prefs. So we would instead, we'd put field name into an array tprefs. And we put this into the name element. And then we would, instead of just putting that into, just putting the text in, we would put array to JSON, and it would be our tprefs array. And we still just put it into URL. It's still just a file URL because JSON is just a text format. So let's try that. And then obviously at the same time, we would put this into tfile. We'd put URL file, and we'd put that into a variable called tjson. We would then convert that to an array. So in this case, we would use JSON to array. It's the JSON into, let's just call it tprefs again, but this will be an array. And then we would have to use the element in the array. So we would put tprefs, and we'd put the name element into our field name. Okay, so let's try that out. Let's save this as a standalone. Okay, let's hide this. Open up our stacks, just going to look the same. Elanor, and then let's close this. Now let's go to my documents folder. And we now have a prefs folder because we created that, and in there we've got name.txt. Now if we open that up, you can see that that is JSON, but the name is missing. So I made a mistake somewhere. So let's go back and see what was wrong. Put field name into tprefs name. Okay, so let's see what is going wrong there. Type my name in. Keyboard doesn't want to work. Keen to type into the script editor. Okay, there we go. And then from the message box, I'm just going to send the close card message so that we can see what's happening. Okay, so we've got our file. We don't need to create the folder this time because it already exists. We put field name into tprefs name. So let's have a look at that in our variable watcher here. Tprefs name Elanor. Put array.json tprefs into URL file and tfile. Okay, so let's have a look at that. Now let's go to the documents folder. And let's open this up. Okay, so Elanor is in there now. So I'm going to delete that. And then let's try building the standalone again. Oh, and that is created because while you're building the standalone, the close card message will be getting sent. So we'll just delete it before we try and run our standalone. Oh, I should have deleted that actually. Save that and let's save standalone application again, because otherwise it'll be saved with my name in it, which we don't want. Okay, so let's try this version. So run preferences save for now. Now I'm going to delete that file so that we know that we're working in the right place. So we'll delete this name file. Let's open this up. Put our name in. Close the stack. Okay, so something is definitely not quite right. I wonder if it is that we need to include our JSON library. Could be the problem. So when you are, sorry, one, in the standalone application settings, if you leave it on search for required inclusions when saving the standalone application, LiveCode's usually pretty good at finding all the inclusions that you need. In a case like this, I'm now wondering if the JSON library is not being included, and that's why our file wasn't created. So it's merg.json that I want to include, which is, I think, down near the bottom somewhere. Try and find merg.json. Tick that, so we'll make sure that the library is now being included. Save a standalone application again. Must be, you know, I'm gonna hope that this live debugging is going to be helpful for people, because things like realizing that what might be wrong is actually nothing wrong with your code, but just that there's a missing inclusion or library. That's quite common. So it's a useful thing to check when you're if your standalone's not behaving exactly how you expect. It might not be that, but it's one of the things that is worth checking. Right, now let's go to the documents folder and have a look. Documents, prefs. Now the name file is in there. It's not 0, so that's good. So let's open it up and hope that my name is in there, and it is. So it was just the fact that the JSON library wasn't being automatically included, and that's why it can be created. And now if I run this again, it should have my name because it's loaded in that JSON data, it's converted it to an array, and it has put the relevant bit of data into the field. So we got there in the end. A nice little bit of debugging there. Okay, so there's a question from Lonnie, which I'll have a look at, and then if we've still got time, I'll jump back to the database example I was going to show you. We can always look at that next week if we don't get to it. So Lonnie said, you talked about the message pass several times. If you have 10 cards, can you set it up that card 10 only refers to card 10 and the stack card and maybe a script only card? Okay, so there's a few things in there. So let's come back to LiveCode and let's create a stack with multiple cards. So new card, new card. So you can now see I'm on card 3. If I use the view menu, I can go first. That takes me to card 1. Go next, card 2. Now, I'm not exactly sure what you're asking, Lonnie. So just in general, the way that messages work is a message will initially be sent to usually a control, but it will depend. For example, the pre-opened card messages, the resize stack message, they get sent to the card, not to a control. But in general, it'll go to the card, then it'll go to the control, then the card, then the stack. So if you have 3 cards, a message will never go from card 1 to card 2 or card 1 to card 3. A message will go from, let's go to card 1. So a message would go from this field to card 1 to the stack. On card 2, a message would go from this button to card 2 to the stack. So if you are referring to controls, so in the card script, when I open this up, you'll see that this is card ID 1003. If I go to card 1 and open up the card script, you'll see that this is card ID 1002. So just to make it a little bit clearer, let's go to card 1. Let's open up the property inspector. We'll give the card a name. So this might be menu. And then we'll go to the next card. And we'll give this card the name about. And then we'll go to card 3. I'm just using the keyboard shortcuts for these options here. So on card 3, so we've done menu, about, so this could be settings. These could be anything. It's just a little bit clearer. So now when I open up, I go to card 1, open up the card script, you can see that we're looking at card menu. On card 2, we're looking at card about. So as long as I'm on card menu, card 1, then if I refer to field name, then it will know that it is field name of card 1 because I am in the card script for card menu. So even if there is a name field on card about, if the code is in here, it knows because it always is referring to the current card. So you don't need to worry too much about that. If you're doing stuff in the card script, you know that it'll be referring to controls, etc. on that card and not anywhere else. Messages would then go from the control to the card to the stack. So in that case, if you're doing stuff on the stack, if you refer to field, which would usually probably be the one on card 1. So in that case, if you're on the stack script and you want to refer to the name field on card 2, then you would just have to refer to it by its longer name, which should be, for example, so I would put tname into field name of card about. So that the stack knows exactly which name field you're referring to. But when you're on the actual card, it's fine. It assumes that it is referring to the current card. Okay, so let me just have a look, because we've got some questions here. So yes, Lonnie, no, it doesn't go through all the cards bottom to top, it just goes control card stack. So if you can imagine a graph, it would be more like a tree. So you'd have there is a graph somewhere. Don't know off the top of my head where it is, but I'll put one into the slides. So the stack is right at the top of the tree. Then the cards are individual branches off the stack, but not connected together. And similarly for the controls on the card, they're branches off the card, and they're separate branches and not connected together. So hopefully that that clears things up a bit for you. And then Devon's asked, yes, you can use send or dispatch to send a message from one card to another. So when I'm talking about the message path, I'm just talking about the sort of the default message path that a message would follow. But you can step outside that if you want to. So if I put a message on here, so on mouse up, so I could send, say, hello to card 3. So let's card 3, and let's do something with say hello. Put a field on here, and we'll call this hello. So in our card script, because I've sent it to the card, I would have a say hello message, a say hello handler, sorry. And for example, I would put the long time into field hello. And we can use this because this will let us know that it is actually happening. So from this button, I send say hello to card 3. Actually, let's use its name. So card 3 was that the settings card? Let's have a look in the project browser so that I don't get it wrong. So we're on Untitled 4. Card 3, 1, 2, 3 is settings. It's good to get into the practice of naming things because it's a lot easier to remember later on what you're referring to. So send say hello to card settings. I know it's going to go to card settings. If I've got 100 cards and I'm sending things to card 47, I might not remember which card 47 is. So good practice to always give your controls, cards, and stacks names. So now if I come back to card 1, if I click on the button, no such object, so I didn't name that field. So it should have worked. Let's try it again. It may be because, oops, sorry. It may be that in this case, because it's been sent from another card, if I put off card settings here, is this going to work? Let's go to send it again. This time it's worked, so now let's go to card 3, and there's the long time, 5:54:01. And this is because the message was initially sent from a button on card menu. So in this case, just have to explicitly save card settings because it's still sort of in the context of that card. If we send it again, the time should have changed to 5:54:25. So yes, you can send, and you can also use dispatch. Send is good if you want to send in time. So you can send a message in 3 seconds or in 5 minutes. Dispatch doesn't give you that option. Dispatch is a little bit easier to send parameters along with your message. So in this case, you dispatch message to target with argument list, which is parameters. Send, you can include them. You can include parameters in send as well. But in this case, you're sending message to object in time. So yes, so that's the main difference. Use send if you want it to be sent in time, so not immediately, and use dispatch if you want to send parameters with it. So you can send messages outside of the normal message path. You just have to manually do it using send or dispatch. Okay, so we don't have much time left. So we've only got about 5 minutes. So I could very briefly have a look at the SQL example, or if anybody wants to pop a question into the chat, then we can. But in these last few minutes, what I've done is I've set up an example already. So this is a sample database that I got from an SQLite lesson, which I'll link to in the slides. It's got some, I think it's song data. So actually, if you're going to be working with SQLite databases, this DB browser for SQLite program is really useful. I think you can get it for all platforms, certainly can get it for Windows as well. So, oh, I didn't mean to do that. So if I open the database, it's just a browser, a database browser. So on the desktop, this is in my SQLite. So if I open up the DB, then you can see that these are the tables, albums, artists, customers. You can browse the data, so you can see what's happening. But let's have a look at the stack. We can maybe come back to this next week if we don't get through all of it, because the database stuff is quite useful. So the first thing we want to do is we want to connect. Now I've put most of my code into the card script because there's some sort of values that are shared. It makes it a little bit easier. So the first thing you want to do is you want to connect to the database. So with an SQLite database, all you need is the path to the file. So again, I'm using special folder path resources, which on the desktop is just next to the stack. So that'll find it. And then the name of the database. And then what you do is you use rev open database. You give it the database type and the path, and it will connect. And what it will give you is it will give you a connection ID, which should be a number. The built-in database types that you can connect to using this method in LiveCode are SQLite, MySQL, PostgreSQL, and ODBC, I think, off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure that's it. Obviously, SQLite is the simplest. You just need the path to the file because it's on your local system. So MySQL, ODBC, SQLite, Postgres, and Oracle. So with the server databases, you obviously need to give them a bit more information. So MySQL is the host address, the database name, usernames, passwords, things like that. But with SQLite, you just need the file path. So that's why we're using it as an example. So you connect, that gives you a number, assuming that it's okay. If not, we will pop up an error. And then what we want to do is we want to store this because we want to use the same database ID for the rest of the things that we do. So I've created a script local variable. So that means that this database ID can be accessed by any of the commands and functions on this script, which is the card script. Then we've got a database disconnect. So when we're done, we just want to close the connection to the database. I've written a function which will return the database ID to me. We could just directly use sDatabase ID, but there might be cases where the database has been closed, something else has happened. So this function will just check to see if the sDatabase ID that we have stored is among the items of Rev Open databases, which is all the currently active database IDs. Then if it is, that's fine, we just use it. Otherwise, we would reconnect to the database and then return the database ID. So let's see what's happening here. If I put a breakpoint here, there's my path to my DB file is on my desktop in the SQLite example folder, chinook.db. We connect, that gives me 750, which is my database ID, so that's fine, no errors. Then what we want to do is I've got a function here, get albums. So we need to get the database ID. We need this for any queries, updates, anything that we want to do with the database. We construct our query, which is just an SQL query. Then we use this. So it's rev data from query. Now this will just give you back the result of the query as a block of text. We want the fields to be, or fields or columns, however you want to think of them, to be comma separated, and the individual records to be return separated. So this will just give us a comma separated list, one per line of the results. We pass the database ID, which is the one we got when we connected, and that's our query. Put it into result, and then we'll put your result into field result. So if I click on get albums, it's executing that query on the database, giving it back as a block of text, and I can just put it into a field. And these are just standard SQL queries. I can order by title here. If I change that, And this is nice because you can do a lot of the work in your query. You could just select the titles from the albums, and then in LiveCode you could sort them, but it's usually faster to do it as part of your SQL query. And there they are, ordered. So if you do it this way, again, it's a separate file. So just like our text file or our JSON file, if we're storing this data in a database, then it's stored separately to the actual stack itself, so it can be written to. Again, of course, you have to put it into a writable location. But this means that all your data is stored externally to your app in a database, and then can be read in again. So it's another way of sort of externally storing your data. And we can certainly come back and talk a bit more about databases maybe next week if we want to. This is obviously a very simple example. We're just getting a list of data, but we equally would maybe want to do updates. We'd want to add things. We'd want to delete things. We would want to do a bit more than just get it back as a block of text. We can get it back as a database query, and we can loop over the results and do different things with them. It's just a very simple example, just tying in with the idea of having to save all your data outside of your stack itself. Okay, so hopefully that's been useful for everybody. I'll just stop sharing my screen. And as I say, if I'll have a look at those things I discussed, I'll find out about how you are informed about the slides and how they're sent to you. I'll have a look at the lesson that you mentioned was missing stuff, Kelly, see if I can see what is going on there. And I guess next week I'll maybe touch on databases again, because it's a really useful thing to know a bit about. But as always, think of some questions, pop them in the chat. We can look at them as we go. And yes, if Devin, if you need to send a message, was it Devin? I think it was, about that have not been responded to, I will have a dig for them, and hopefully they've just maybe been filtered. But support@livecode.com in general is the right email address if you need to contact us about everything. Okay, thank you everybody. I hope you have a good rest of your day, evening, whatever time it is there, and I will see you all next week. Okay, bye everybody.